Chosen one, your soulmate wrote a 5-page letter to you. A surprising secret was revealed inside it. My beloved child, listen carefully. What if the letter you have been waiting for was never meant to be ordinary? What if someone who has been silently carrying feelings for you finally found the courage to write down everything they could never say face to face? 5 pages. 5 pages filled with words that were carefully hidden, rewritten, and almost thrown away. And somewhere inside those pages is one secret that could completely change how you understand your soulmate connection. Before we uncover that secret, comment 777 if your heart feels that something unexpected is about to be revealed to you. This is not about a random message appearing at the perfect time. This is about a message that carries emotional weight. A message someone struggled to finish because every sentence forced them to confront something they had been avoiding for far too long. Your soulmate did not simply sit down and write your name. They sat alone with memories they had tried to bury. They remembered moments you probably thought meant nothing. A glance that lasted 1 second longer than normal. A conversation that ended too soon. A moment when they wanted to say something important but chose silence instead. Those memories became the foundation of the letter. But there is something unusual about those 5 pages. The first page was not about love. It was about regret. Your soulmate wrote about a decision they made when fear was louder than their heart. They admitted that they once believed walking away would make everything easier. They thought distance would erase the feelings. They believed time would make your memory weaker. Instead, something unexpected happened. The distance made your presence stronger inside their thoughts. They began noticing your absence in places where they never expected to notice it. A song reminded them of you. A quiet evening reminded them of you. Even ordinary moments began carrying pieces of your memory. But your soulmate did not understand why. They tried to convince themselves that this was simply nostalgia. Then another realization appeared. Nostalgia usually fades. This did not. It kept growing. The second page became even more personal. Your soulmate wrote about the moment they realized they had been comparing every new connection to what they felt with you. They did not want to admit it. They even tried to move forward emotionally. Yet something always felt incomplete. They could laugh with someone else. They could have normal conversations. They could continue living their daily life. But deep inside, there remained an unfinished sentence. And that sentence had your name hidden inside it. Still, the most important part had not been written yet. Your soulmate had discovered something about the timing of your connection. Something that made them question whether meeting you had been coincidence at all. They remembered how strangely certain moments seemed to align. They remembered conversations that happened when they needed them most. They remembered how you appeared during a season when they were emotionally lost. At the time, they did not understand the meaning. Now they were beginning to see a pattern. And that pattern frightened them. Because if the connection was truly meaningful, then their previous decision had consequences they could no longer ignore. The letter was becoming less like a confession and more like an emotional reckoning. Your soulmate was finally telling the truth to themselves. That is why the third page took them the longest to write. They stopped several times. They put the pen down. They stared at the unfinished page. They wondered whether they should continue. Then they wrote something that revealed the deepest conflict inside their heart. They admitted that they had been afraid of how deeply you affected them. Not because you did something wrong. Not because the connection was unhealthy. They were afraid because you reached a part of them they had carefully protected from everyone else. You made them feel seen without demanding an explanation. You made silence feel meaningful. You made ordinary moments feel strangely important. And that frightened someone who had spent years controlling their emotions. They confessed that being near you made their defenses weaker. Being away from you made their thoughts louder. So they chose distance because distance felt safer. But safety came with a price. They lost the person who made them feel most understood. Then something happened while they were writing the fourth page. They found an old memory connected to you. It may have been a message, a photograph, a small object, or something completely ordinary. But when they saw it, they suddenly understood why they had never been able to let go. The memory carried something they had forgotten. Your soulmate had promised themselves something during that moment. A promise they never told you about. And now that promise was staring back at them. They realized they had broken it. That realization changed the entire letter. The words became more direct. The excuses disappeared. The fear became honesty. Your soulmate finally wrote what they had wanted to tell you for a very long time. But even then, they were not ready to reveal everything. There was still one final page. And that final page contained the secret that could explain why this connection never completely disappeared. Don't skip. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you. The fifth page began with a sentence your soulmate almost could not write. It was not a dramatic declaration. It was something much more vulnerable. They admitted that they had been watching for a sign that you still cared. Not necessarily through direct contact. They were looking for something deeper. They wanted proof that the connection had not existed only inside their own heart. And then they remembered one particular moment when you unknowingly gave them that proof. They had misunderstood it at first. Now they saw it differently. That moment became the key to the entire letter. Because your soulmate realized something painful. You had been waiting for clarity while they had been waiting for courage. Both hearts had been standing near the same door. Neither person had known who should knock first. But the letter was no longer about waiting. It was about what your soulmate intended to do next. And hidden beneath those 5 pages was one final truth. They were not writing the letter simply to remember you. They were writing it because they had finally decided that silence could no longer protect them from what their heart already knew. The final sentence on that 5th page was followed by a long silence. Your soulmate stared at the words as if they had finally written something they had spent months trying to understand. Then they folded the page carefully and placed it beneath the others. But they did not seal the letter immediately. There was still one decision left. They had to decide whether those 5 pages would remain hidden or finally reach the person they were written for. That decision was harder than writing the letter itself. Because sending the letter meant surrendering control. It meant allowing another person to see the truth behind every hesitation, every missed opportunity, and every moment of silence. Your soulmate understood that once the letter was sent, there would be no easy way to take those words back. They could no longer pretend that everything was fine. They could no longer hide behind timing or distance. The letter would speak for them. And that frightened them more than they expected. Yet something inside them had already changed. They were no longer asking whether they still had feelings. That question had been answered. They were asking whether they were finally brave enough to act on those feelings. That distinction became the turning point. For a long time, your soulmate believed love was mainly about emotion. Now they understood that real love also demands honesty, responsibility, and courage. Feelings can remain hidden for years. But eventually, truth asks to be acknowledged. That was exactly what those 5 pages represented. They were not simply romantic words. They were evidence of an internal transformation. The person who once ran from difficult emotions was finally willing to face them. The person who once chose silence was finally considering a conversation. The person who once believed distance would solve everything was beginning to understand that distance had only delayed the truth. But there was another detail hidden inside the letter. Something even more surprising. Your soulmate had written about a specific future moment. They imagined meeting you again after all the confusion had settled. They imagined sitting across from you without pretending. No excuses. No emotional games. No carefully chosen words designed to protect their pride. Just honesty. They wanted to tell you why they disappeared. They wanted to explain what was happening inside them during that time. Most importantly, they wanted you to know that your value was never the reason they pulled away. Their fear was. That realization carried enormous emotional weight. Because sometimes the person who leaves is not leaving because they feel nothing. Sometimes they leave because feeling something real forces them to confront parts of themselves they have avoided for years. Your soulmate had been doing exactly that. They were confronting themselves. And the letter became the place where they could finally stop pretending. Don't skip. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you. There was also a strange detail about the timing of the letter. Your soulmate did not write it during a moment of excitement. They wrote it after a period of deep reflection. That matters. Emotional decisions made during excitement can disappear quickly. This one had survived silence, distance, doubt, and time. The feelings remained. That gave the letter a completely different meaning. They were not chasing a temporary emotion. They were acknowledging something that had continued despite every attempt to move past it. But then your soulmate reached the most difficult question. What if you no longer wanted them? What if too much time had passed? What if the connection they still felt was no longer shared? That fear almost stopped them. They imagined every possible response. Acceptance. Silence. Anger. Confusion. Even rejection. They knew they could not control what happened after the letter reached you. And that was the hardest lesson of all. Love cannot demand an outcome. It can only offer truth. For the first time, your soulmate understood that. They did not want to send the letter to force you back into their life. They wanted to send it because you deserved to know what had really happened. That changed the energy behind every word. The confession became cleaner. The apology became more sincere. The hope became quieter. And the final page became something much deeper than a romantic promise. It became an act of emotional freedom. Your soulmate was releasing the truth they had carried alone. But there was one sentence they kept rewriting. They wrote it once. Then crossed it out. They wrote it again. Then changed 3 words. Finally, they stopped trying to make it perfect. The sentence said that meeting you had changed the way they understood love. Not because everything between you had been easy. It had not. But because your connection forced them to become more honest with themselves. That sentence stayed. They knew it was true. Then they added something even more unexpected. They admitted that they had sometimes wondered whether you were thinking about them at the exact moments they were thinking about you. They never had proof. But certain coincidences had become difficult to dismiss. Dreams. Unexpected reminders. Songs appearing at strange moments. Names appearing where they least expected them. Places suddenly carrying emotional meaning. None of these things could prove anything by themselves. But together, they kept reopening the same question. Why had this connection remained so emotionally powerful? Your soulmate did not have a perfect answer. But they knew they could no longer call it meaningless. Then came the final decision. The letter was ready. 5 pages. 5 pages of regret, memory, fear, truth, and hope. But instead of sending it immediately, your soulmate placed it somewhere private. They needed one night to think. One final night before taking the step that could change everything. And that night, something happened that they never expected. They woke from a dream with one specific sentence still in their mind. A sentence that connected directly to the secret they had written on the 5th page. It was so clear that they immediately reached for the letter. And when they read that final page again, they realized they had misunderstood the most important part of their own story. The letter was not really about the past. It was about a choice waiting in the present. And that choice was about to bring a truth into the open that neither of you could easily ignore. The next morning, your soulmate woke before the alarm and reached for the letter without thinking. For several seconds, they simply stared at it. The room was quiet, but their mind was not. The dream from the previous night had left one powerful thought behind. They could no longer keep postponing the truth. They opened the letter again and slowly read every page. This time, the words felt different. The first page no longer sounded like regret. It sounded like recognition. The second page no longer sounded like confusion. It sounded like acceptance. The third page revealed the fear they had finally understood. The fourth page exposed the decision they had avoided. And the fifth page contained the truth they had been trying to protect from themselves. Then they noticed something they had completely overlooked. There was one sentence written near the bottom of the final page that connected everything together. It explained why they had never been able to fully move forward, even when they convinced themselves that they had. The sentence was simple, but its meaning was enormous. They realized they had not been missing the past. They had been missing the possibility of a future they never allowed themselves to explore. That realization changed everything. Suddenly, the letter was no longer a goodbye to an old chapter. It became the beginning of a decision. Your soulmate understood that there were two different kinds of waiting. One kind waits because it is afraid to move. The other waits because it is preparing to move correctly. For a long time, they had been trapped in the first kind. Now something inside them had shifted. They were ready for the second. But before taking any action, they wanted to understand one thing. Why had the connection remained so strong after everything that happened? They began looking through old conversations and memories. They noticed details they had forgotten. There were moments when you had encouraged them without realizing how deeply your words affected them. There were moments when you gave them patience when they expected judgment. There were moments when your presence made difficult days feel lighter. At the time, they had not recognized the importance of those moments. Now they could see them clearly. The connection had not been built from one dramatic event. It had been built through dozens of small moments that quietly stayed inside their heart. That discovery made the letter even more meaningful. They realized they had been searching for one extraordinary reason to explain their feelings. The truth was much simpler. You had become important through consistency, understanding, and emotional safety. And that was something they could not easily replace. Still, another fear appeared. What if reaching out destroyed the possibility completely? What if the silence had become too long? What if you had already healed and moved forward? Those questions were painful, but they were necessary. Your soulmate finally understood that avoiding those questions would only create another cycle of regret. So they made a promise. They would not approach you with demands. They would not expect instant forgiveness. They would not pretend the past never happened. They would simply tell the truth. That decision gave them a strange sense of peace. For the first time, they were not trying to control the outcome. They were simply choosing honesty. Then they added something to the letter. It was not another explanation. It was an apology. Not the kind of apology people give when they want something in return. This one acknowledged the emotional confusion their silence may have caused. They admitted that disappearing had created questions you never deserved to carry alone. They admitted that their fear had affected someone who had never asked to be hurt by it. And they accepted responsibility without trying to make excuses. That was the moment the letter became complete. But there was still one final decision. How would they deliver it? They considered sending it digitally. They considered leaving it somewhere you would find it naturally. They even considered keeping it forever. Every option carried risk. Then they remembered something from your past. There had been a place where an important conversation between you once happened. It was not glamorous. It was not dramatic. But it carried emotional meaning because both of you had been completely honest there. Your soulmate suddenly knew where they wanted to go. They wanted to return to that place. Not because they expected the past to repeat itself. They wanted to create a new memory in the same place where an old one had shaped them. That thought brought tears to their eyes. They realized they were no longer chasing the person they remembered. They were hoping to meet the person you had both become. That distinction mattered. People change. Hearts mature. Experiences leave marks. Your soulmate knew they could not return expecting everything to feel exactly the same. They could only return ready to discover what remained. And that uncertainty made the moment feel even more real. They placed the 5 pages inside an envelope and wrote your name carefully across the front. Their hand paused for several seconds. Then they stopped. Something else had caught their attention. Beneath the letter was a small note they had forgotten about. It contained only a few words. Words written during the exact period when they first realized their feelings were deeper than they admitted. Reading that note gave them chills because it revealed something they had completely forgotten. They had already known the truth back then. They simply had not been brave enough to accept it. And now, years or months later, the same truth had returned to them through 5 handwritten pages. The timing felt impossible to ignore. But the biggest revelation was still ahead. Because the forgotten note contained a date. And that date was connected to a moment involving you that your soulmate had never understood until now. The date on that forgotten note made your soulmate freeze. They read it once. Then again. Their breathing became slower as the memory returned. That date was connected to a moment they had almost completely forgotten. It was the day you said something simple that seemed ordinary at the time. But now, after everything they had experienced, those words carried a completely different meaning. Your soulmate remembered where they were standing. They remembered the expression on your face. They remembered the hesitation in your voice. Most importantly, they remembered what they felt immediately afterward. They had felt something shift inside them. They had ignored it then. Now they understood why. That moment had been the beginning of a realization they were not emotionally prepared to accept. The forgotten note proved something important. Their feelings had not suddenly appeared recently. They had been growing quietly for much longer than they admitted. The letter was simply the first time they had finally put those feelings into words. They sat down again and placed the note beside the 5 pages. For several minutes, they did nothing. They simply looked at both pieces of paper. One had been written long ago. The other had been written after everything they had endured since then. Yet both carried the same emotional truth. That realization shook them deeply. They had spent so much time wondering whether the connection was real. Now they were staring at evidence that their heart had recognized something before their mind was ready. But another detail made the situation even more surprising. The date on the old note was not random. It was connected to the same period when your life had also taken an unexpected turn. Your soulmate remembered hearing that you were going through a difficult transition. They remembered wanting to reach out. They remembered typing a message and deleting it. Then typing another one and deleting that too. They had convinced themselves that staying away was the respectful thing to do. But deep inside, they had been afraid of what your response might reveal. What if you felt the same way? What if you did not? Both possibilities terrified them. So they chose silence. Now they finally understood the cost of that silence. They had protected themselves from one uncomfortable conversation while creating years of unanswered questions. The realization hurt, but it also brought clarity. They could not change the moment when they walked away. They could change what they did next. Don't skip. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you. Your soulmate then noticed another unusual detail. The old note had been folded several times, but one corner contained a small mark. It was something they had made without thinking. They suddenly remembered why. They had written the note immediately after seeing something that reminded them of you. At that time, they had laughed at themselves and called it a coincidence. But now they remembered how often similar coincidences had appeared afterward. A song. A location. A familiar phrase. A random name. A dream that felt unusually vivid. Each event had been easy to dismiss individually. Together, they had created a pattern that never completely disappeared. Your soulmate was not claiming that every coincidence carried a supernatural meaning. They were recognizing something more personal. Your memory had remained emotionally active inside them. Even when they tried to build a different life, some part of their heart continued returning to the same unfinished story. That was why the 5-page letter had become necessary. They needed to stop running from the question. What would happen if they finally told the truth? They picked up the envelope and walked toward the door. Then they stopped again. Their fear returned. Not because they doubted their feelings. This time, they were afraid of what honesty might require afterward. A sincere confession creates responsibility. Once someone knows the truth, they cannot comfortably return to pretending. Your soulmate understood that. If the letter reached you, everything could change. You might welcome the words. You might need time. You might not feel the same way anymore. They had to accept every possibility. That was the hardest part. They realized love could not be measured by whether they received the answer they wanted. Sometimes courage means telling the truth without knowing what comes next. So they made one final adjustment to the letter. They added a sentence asking you for nothing. No promise. No immediate answer. No pressure. Just honesty. That sentence became one of the most important lines in the entire letter. It showed that their feelings had matured. They were no longer writing from desperation. They were writing from clarity. Then they sealed the envelope. For the first time, there was no hesitation. They knew exactly what they had to do. But before leaving, they looked at the 5 pages one last time. Something inside them whispered that the letter might not be the only message waiting to be delivered. There was another truth they had not written down. A truth connected to the reason they had been pulled back toward you at this exact stage of their life. They had believed the letter explained everything. It did not. The letter explained the past. The next step would reveal the future. And that future was connected to a choice you had not yet realized was approaching. Your soulmate knew one thing with absolute certainty. If they waited any longer, fear would find another excuse. So they opened the door and stepped outside with the letter in their hand. For the first time, they were not walking away from you. They were walking toward the truth. And somewhere ahead, an encounter was already beginning to take shape. Neither of you knew how close that moment had become. But the 5 pages were about to leave the hands that wrote them and enter the life of the person they were always meant to reach. The door closed behind your soulmate, and for the first time, there was no turning back. The 5-page letter rested safely in their hand, but the real weight was inside their heart. Every step toward that meeting carried memories they had tried to silence. Yet this time, they were not running from those memories. They were finally walking toward the truth they had avoided for so long. As they moved forward, one thought kept returning. What if the person receiving this letter had been waiting too? That question made their heart race. They did not know the answer. They only knew that they were finally willing to discover it. When they reached the place connected to your past, everything suddenly felt strangely familiar. The surroundings looked almost the same, but your soulmate felt completely different. They stood there quietly and remembered the conversation that had once changed something inside them. They remembered your expression. They remembered the words you spoke. They remembered what they wanted to say but could not. Then they looked down at the envelope. 5 pages. 5 pages that had taken courage to create. 5 pages that carried everything their silence had hidden. They realized something beautiful. The letter was never really about convincing you to return. It was about finally giving you the truth you deserved. That realization removed the last trace of fear. Your soulmate sat down and opened the envelope one final time. They read the first page slowly. Then the second. Then the third. By the 4th page, their eyes had become emotional. When they reached the 5th page, they stopped. The final words suddenly felt different. They understood that the greatest secret inside the letter was not a hidden name, another person, or some dramatic confession. The secret was that they had never truly stopped choosing you in their heart. Even when their actions looked different, something inside them continued protecting connection. They had mistaken fear for closure. They had mistaken distance for healing. They had mistaken silence for moving on. But none of those things had erased what remained. They had only delayed the moment of truth. And now that moment had arrived. Don't skip. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you. Then your soulmate added one final sentence to the letter. It was not written in the original 5 pages. It was written that morning. The sentence said that if life gave them another opportunity, they would not waste it by pretending they did not care. They would communicate instead of disappearing. They would ask instead of assuming. They would listen instead of protecting their pride. And they would never again make fear responsible for a decision that belonged to the heart. That was the real transformation. Your soulmate was no longer the same person who had written the first page. The journey between those pages had changed them. The regret had taught them honesty. The distance had taught them value. The silence had taught them communication. And the possibility of losing you completely had taught them courage. Then came the moment they had imagined so many times. They saw you. For one brief second, neither of you moved. Everything around you seemed to disappear. There was no dramatic music. No perfect speech. Just two people standing in front of a truth that had waited far too long. Your soulmate held the letter tightly. You looked at them with an expression they could not immediately understand. Then they walked closer. They did not begin with an excuse. They did not begin with a promise. They simply handed you the envelope. Your name was written across the front. You looked down at it. 5 pages. Your hands became still. Then you looked back at them. They finally spoke the words they had been afraid to say. Everything I could not tell you is inside. That was enough. You opened the letter. The first page revealed the regret. The second revealed the memories. The third revealed the fear. The fourth revealed the decision. And the fifth revealed the truth. As you continued reading, your expression slowly changed. Some words brought surprise. Others brought sadness. But one sentence made you stop completely. It explained something you had secretly wondered about for a long time. Their silence had never meant that you were forgotten. Their distance had never meant that you were unimportant. They had been struggling with themselves. And now they had finally chosen honesty over fear. You looked up again. This time, your soulmate did not look away. There was no hiding left. No unanswered question could remain protected behind silence. Whatever happened next would be real. And that was the most powerful part of the entire journey. The letter had done what words spoken in fear could never do. It opened a door. Not necessarily to a perfect relationship. Not necessarily to an instant reunion. It opened a door to truth, healing, and a genuine choice. Sometimes the greatest love story does not begin when two people meet. Sometimes it begins when two people finally become brave enough to tell the truth about what happened after they met. That was the secret hidden inside those 5 pages. Your soulmate was not simply remembering you. They were finally understanding what you meant to them. They were finally accepting the consequences of their choices. And they were finally willing to meet the future without hiding behind fear. The 5-page letter became more than a confession. It became proof that some emotions survive distance because they were never built on convenience. They survived because something meaningful happened. Something that changed both people. And whether your next chapter begins with reconciliation, a conversation, closure, or a completely unexpected new beginning, one truth remains powerful. You deserved honesty. You deserved clarity. You deserved to know that your story mattered. The letter finally delivered that truth. And perhaps that is why its timing feels so significant. Sometimes life does not bring an answer when we demand one. It brings an answer when we are finally ready to understand it. If this story touched something deep inside you, take a moment and leave a heartfelt comment below. Tell us what part of the letter felt most meaningful to you. If you enjoyed this message, give the video a like so more people can discover it. Share this video with someone who may need to hear these words today. Subscribe to the channel for more emotional spiritual stories and meaningful soulmate messages. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next message when it arrives. And if you believe that truth can find its way to the right heart at the right time, leave one final word in the comments.